All right, so welcome everyone to another deep dive. This time we're tackling the nature of language itself.
Sounds ambitious.
Oh, it is. We've got a whole stack of lectures here from some pretty serious linguistic scholars. But don't
Sure,
worry.
I'll spare you the dense academic stuff.
Yeah, we'll get right to the good stuff, the really interesting
The
parts.
fascinating stuff.
So our mission today is to kind of shake things up a bit.
Hmm.
We're going to challenge what you think you know about, well, words and sentences.
Yeah, we're going to look at language through a different lens, through semiotics, which is the study of signs.
Ah, it's okay.
And this challenges the idea that words are just simple building blocks.
Okay, so it's more than just like stringing words together. Like, what's the big deal here?
It's much more. Think about how elements combine, like oxygen and hydrogen. You put those two together and you get water.
Right.
Water isn't just oxygen plus hydrogen, though, right? It's something entirely new with its own properties.
So you're saying words are kind of like that?
Exactly. The sound of a word and then the concept, the meaning, those are like the elements. When they bond, they create a sign, something more than the sum of its parts.
Okay, so like the word tree.
Yes, sure.
It isn't just the sound tree and then the idea of a tree.
Right.
It's that special combination.
Exactly. It's that special combination. It becomes a meaningful word, a sign. That relationship between the sound and the meaning is crucial. We ignore that. We miss the essence of language.
Okay, that makes sense, I think.
Yeah.
But then how do we categorize all these signs?
Yeah.
I mean, we've got nouns, verbs, adjectives, all those things. Isn't that how we make sense of language?
Yeah, that's where things get a little tricky because, linguists have been trying to fit words into these neat little categories
Right.
like word classes, but it's not that simple.
Okay.
Some approaches, they kind of lump everything together, they ignore the important distinctions.
Right.
And then others go the complete opposite way. They create all these endless subcategories for every little difference in how a word is used.
So it's like, I don't know, like having a junk drawer, you know,
Yeah.
versus like color coding every single item in your house. Neither one's really practical.
Right, exactly. And then some languages, they blur the lines even further. You have words that function as both a noun and a verb, depending on the context.
Ah, okay. So what's the solution? How do we deal with this? How do we make sense of it all?
Well, the key is understanding that words have these primary and secondary functions.
Oh, okay.
So, a noun, its home base is as the subject, the thing doing the action.
Right.
But it can also play secondary roles, like acting as a verb or an adjective in certain situations.
So it's like a word can have a main job, but then it can also pick up some side gigs if it needs
Yeah,
to.
exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Okay, I like that. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, sure. Let's take the word light.
Okay.
Now, fundamentally, it's a noun, right? It's something you can see with.
Right.
But in the sentence, the paper is light, it's not acting as a subject.
Right.
It's actually describing the paper. It's functioning more like an adjective.
So its primary function, that nounness, is kind of on hold there. It's doing something else.
Precisely. And that challenges that traditional view that the paper is light is a transformation of light paper. It's actually the opposite.
It's the other way around? Oh, wow, that's a mind bender.
Yeah,
So we can't just assume all parts of speech are interchangeable.
right.
We have to think about their primary function and how that might change
Exactly.
depending on the sentence.
And this actually brings us to a really interesting question, which is the sentence truly the king of language, like we often think it is?
Ooh, okay, yeah. Sentences are the building blocks, right,
Yeah.
of how we communicate. That's what I thought.
Well, that's the traditional view. But semiotic linguistics would argue that the word is the true sign. That's the fundamental unit.
Oh,
Sentences are units of using language, putting those signs into action.
so the sentence gets demoted.
In a way, yeah.
It's more of a tool.
It's a vehicle, a vehicle for communication.
Okay.
But the words themselves are the real stars.
The words are the stars.
And syntax, the way we arrange words, is really about how those words combine, not just how sentences are formed.
Okay, so that really flips the script. It makes you see words in a whole new light, pun intended.
Yeah.
Okay, but here's where it gets even more fascinating. You ready for this?
I'm right?
Okay, so the structure of sentences actually mirrors the structure of syllables.
It does.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
How is that even possible?
It's pretty amazing. Think about it. The subject of a sentence is like the onset of a syllable, the initial consonant sound. They're both the foundation, the starting point.
Okay, I'm following you.
Okay? And then the predicate, the action of the sentence is like the nucleus of a syllable, the vowel sound.
Yeah.
They both form the core.
It's like a linguistic equation.
Yeah.
Subject equals onset, predicate equals nucleus. That's incredible.
And it goes even deeper than that. We can actually classify parts of syllables like word classes. Some act like nouns, others act like verbs.
So it's not just a parallel, it's a whole system of correspondence between sounds and sentences.
Exactly.
Wow, who would have thought?
Yeah.
But there's another crucial element that we often overlook, and that's the phoneme.
The phone, right.
So tell me about the phon. Why is that so important?
So the phoneme is the basic unit of sound that distinguishes meaning. So think about the difference between bat and pat.
Okay, bat pat.
That one single sound change creates a whole new word.
Right. So it's the tiny building block of sound that helps us tell words apart.
Exactly. But phonemes aren't just sounds, they're actually signs themselves. They signify utterable distinctions. They're like signs of signs.
Whoa. Okay, that's getting pretty meta.
Yeah, it is.
So what you're saying is that the way we communicate and the very sounds we use are not separate.
They're not separate at all.
They're deeply connected.
Deeply intertwined. It's really amazing.
This whole deep dive is just showing us how, like, things that we thought were separate, like sound and meaning, words and sentences, they're all connected.
They are. They're all connected in these really fascinating ways. And that brings us to a key concept that we're going to see throughout our exploration, and that's this idea of duality.
Duality.
Duality. So this is the idea that there are these seemingly opposite forces that are actually interdependent.
Okay.
Like, for example, language and thought.
Okay.
Or the individual and society. These dualities, they pop up everywhere in language. And recognizing those dualities is key to understanding how it all works.
Okay, my brain is already doing somersaults. I can't wait to see what other dualities we uncover as we keep going.
Oh, there are more. There are definitely more, and we've only just scratched the surface here. Next time, we're going to delve into the complexities of sentences and how they're structured. So stay tuned for that.
Welcome back to our deep dive into language. Last time we were talking about how words are the real stars, not sentences.
Right, but sentences are still like the stage where words come together to create meaning, tell stories, all that. So we need to understand how they work.
So it's like a play. The words are the actors, but the sentences are the script that tells them what to do.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And just like a good script, sentences have structure. And two key concepts help us understand that structure, predicative articulation, and attributive articulation.
Okay, this sounds a little intimidating. Can you break those down for me?
Sure. So predicative articulation is like the core relationship in a sentence. It's the connection between the subject, the doer of the action, and the predicate, the action itself.
Okay, so in the cat chased the mouse, the cat is the subject. Chased is the predicate. And that relationship tells us what's happening.
Exactly. Now, attributive articulation, that's about adding the extra details that flesh out the sentence, give it more depth and nuance.
Like the sleek black cat stealthily chased the tiny mouse. So, sleek, black, stealthily tiny. Those are all attributes.
Exactly. And those attributes, they can modify nouns, verbs, even entire sentences.
So we could have, like, unfortunately, the cat chased the mouse, with unfortunately modifying the whole situation.
Precisely. And the interesting thing is, these articulations, they follow certain patterns, like rules of the game.
Ooh, I love rules. Tell me more.
Well, one fundamental rule is that every sentence has to have a subject.
Oh,
Even if it's not explicitly stated, there's an implied subject.
right, like it's raining, the subject's implied, we know it's the weather even though we don't say it.
Exactly. Another rule is that a simple sentence can only have one subject, one direct object, and one indirect object.
Right.
If there's more than one of any of those, then you're dealing with a complex sentence. It's a combination of multiple simple sentences.
So sometimes what looks like one sentence is actually a bunch of sentences bundled together, like those Russian nesting dolls.
That's a great way to visualize it. Now, all this points to another important principle, the binary structure of sentences.
Binary, like ones and zeros.
Well, not quite, but the idea is similar. Sentences are built through combinations of two elements. One joins with another to create a larger unit.
So we start with individual words, combine them into phrases, then into clauses, and finally, the whole sentence.
Exactly. And this binary structure, it's not random. It reveals a hierarchy of relationships within the sentence.
Okay, so there's a deeper order to it, not just words lined up in a row.
Precisely. And this structure reveals an interesting asymmetry between the subject and the object in relation to the verb.
The symmetry. What do you mean?
So the connection between the verb and its object is stronger, more intimate than the connection between the verb and the subject.
So in The Cat Chased the Mouse, chased and mouse are closer than chased and cat.
Exactly. There's a tighter bond there. And we see evidence for this in several ways. For instance, in some languages, a transitive verb and its direct object can actually be replaced by a single intransitive verb.
Wow. So the verb and object are so close, they can become like one unit.
Precisely. Another clue is how nouns that are derived from verbs behave. So nouns from transitive verbs, they tend to focus on the object,
Okay.
while nouns from intransitive verbs, they focus on the subject.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, sure. Think about the word abduction. It comes from the transitive verb abduct, right?
Right.
And in the phrase, the abduction of the woman, the focus is on the woman, the object of the abduction.
Right.
But a noun like barking, from the intransitive verb to bark, focuses on the subject, the dog's barking.
That's fascinating. So the object of a transitive verb is like more central to the meaning.
Exactly. Now, we've been talking about these sentence structures, these combinations and hierarchies, but sentences aren't static. They change, they shift, depending on the context.
Right, like turning a statement into a question or using the passive voice.
Right, and that's where the concept of diathesis comes in.
Diathesis. That sounds kind of like a medical term.
It does. It has Greek roots. But in linguistics, it refers to the different ways a verb can express an action depending on the roles of the subject and object.
So like switching between active and passive voice.
Exactly. In active voice, the subject performs the action. The cat chased the mouse.
Right.
But in passive voice, the object becomes the subject. The mouse was chased by the cat.
So it's like changing the perspective.
But highlighting the receiver of the action rather than the performer.
Okay. But passive voice isn't just rearranging the words, right? There's something deeper going on.
It's a deeper transformation of the sentence structure.
Okay, so how does the structure change?
Well, in passive voice, the original subject becomes an optional agent phrase,
Okay.
like by the cat. It's still there, but it's not the main focus anymore.
So it's like a side note, not the star of the show anymore.
Exactly. And this raises an interesting question. Is passive voice like a fundamental structure in language, or is it derived from active voice?
It feels like active voice is more like straightforward, more natural.
Many linguists would agree with you, and the evidence suggests that passive voice is actually derived from active voice.
So active voice is like the original blueprint, and passive voice is a modified version.
Precisely. One piece of evidence is that passive voice often changes the transitivity of the verb. So in the cat chased the mouse, chased is a transitive verb. It takes a direct object.
Right.
But in the mouse was chased becomes intransitive. It doesn't need a direct object anymore.
It's like going from a two-person dance to a solo performance.
That's a great analogy. Another clue is that languages without a distinct passive voice still manage to express similar meanings, using other constructions.
So passive voice isn't essential.
Right. It's more like a tool that some languages have developed,
Right.
not a core part of language itself. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. The traditional view sees passive voice as this two-part structure, the subject and the passive verb phrase.
Okay.
But our sources, they introduce this concept of tripartite passive.
Tripartite passive.
Yeah, so it's a structure with three parts.
Three parts. Okay. What's the third part?
The agent phrase.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not just the mouse was chased, it's the mouse was chased by the cat.
Ah, so instead of being optional, the by the cat becomes a key part of the structure.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that this tripartite passive, it actually reveals the underlying structure of passive voice more clearly.
So it's like we're peeking behind the curtain,
Yeah.
seeing how the magic trick is done.
Precisely. Tripartite passive shows us that passive voice is a transformation of the active voice. The object becomes the subject, and the original subject becomes the agent phrase.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. It's like those optical illusions where the same image can look totally different depending on how you look at it.
That's a great way to put it. We're starting to see the flexibility, the complexity of sentences, how they can be shaped and transformed to convey different meanings.
This is mind-blowing stuff. We've gone from those basic building blocks of sentences to these intricate transformations. What's next on our linguistic adventure?
Well, we've covered the big picture view of sentences. Now let's zoom in even closer and explore how individual words behave within those structures. Get ready for some word-based syntactic phenomena.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on this crazy journey through language, from signs to sentences, and how they make meaning.
And now we're going to zoom in on those tiny but mighty words. We talked about their primary functions
Right.
and how those can change depending on the context.
Like light, sometimes it's a noun, sometimes an adjective.
Exactly. And this is where things get even more interesting with these, what we call word-based syntactic phenomena.
Word-based syntactic phenomena.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. But
Yeah.
basically, it's how words can kind of change their roles within a sentence.
Okay.
It adds like layers of complexity to the meaning.
Okay, I'm ready for some examples. How do these, like, word chameleons work in practice?
Okay, so let's take the sentence. I saw her painting the house. The word painting there, that's a perfect example.
Okay, painting.
Is it a noun describing the activity?
Right.
Or is it an adjective describing what her was doing?
It feels like it's doing both somehow.
You're right. It's both a noun and an adjective at the same time.
Whoa.
And it's that multi-layered function that creates this richer meaning.
Okay, so it's not just about, like, labeling a word, noun, verb, adjective. It's about understanding its role.
Exactly. Context is key.
Right.
Here's another example. I looked at the picture on the table. Now, at first glance, on seems like an adjective, right?
Right.
Describing the picture's location, like the table picture.
Right, the table picture, yeah.
But if we compare it to, say, I looked at the factory, we see that on is actually part of a prepositional phrase.
Okay.
On the table, which functions as a direct object.
Ah, I see. It's all about who on is hanging out with. Its role changes depending on the company it keeps.
Exactly. And these word-based syntactic phenomena, they really highlight something crucial. We can't understand how words function just by looking at them in isolation.
Right.
It's all about the relationships they form within a sentence.
Like those optical illusions, where the same shape can look different depending on what's around it.
That's a great analogy. And these phenomena, they have a real impact on how we understand language.
Like how? Give me some real-world examples.
Well, think about ambiguity. Those times when a sentence could have multiple meanings.
Right.
That's often because a word is playing multiple roles, and we're not sure which interpretation is correct.
And of course, humor uses this all the time. Comedians are masters of twisting words and their functions.
Exactly. But unintentional ambiguity, that can lead to, miscommunication. So being aware of these subtle shifts can help us be more precise.
It's like being a language detective, looking for clues.
That's a great way to put it. And it all comes back to this idea of superposition.
Right, those multiple hats.
Exactly. Superposition is what allows language to be so flexible, so expressive.
Wow. This has been a truly mind-bending deep dive.
It has.
We've gone from those basic signs to the structure of sentences, and now to this amazing world of wordplay and shifting meanings.
And we've seen how language is more than just a set of rules. It's this dynamic system where words can dance and change roles.
It's like a symphony of meaning.
Exactly.
And I think the biggest takeaway is that there's always more to discover.
There is.
The more we explore, the more we realize we don't know.
That's the beauty of it.
It truly is. Thanks for joining us on this linguistic adventure. Until next time, keep those words flowing and those brains buzzing.